expecting a couple more people, but we've got enough to proceed.
All right, and it is 12 o'clock, right on the button. So we will call to order this meeting of the CJCC Operations Committee. And Sarah, would you mind running through the roll call of who's on the meeting?
Yes. So we've got Chair Chris Korthela, myself, Sarah Benedict. We've got IT support with Krista Vind. We've got County Board Chair Dave Bartlett. We've got Chief of Police Eric Atkinson. We've got DA Andrea Nodoff. We've got Judge Christina Meyer. We've got County Manager Paul Miller. We've got Supervisor Jim Tripp. We've got Clerk of Court Katie Shalley. We've got Sheriff Kevin Bigg. And we have our citizen member Shelley Jo Metzger joining us. I did receive an email from the new Fields Operations Supervisor with DOC, Michelle Barrow. She wasn't able to join us today. And also Jonathan Lundeen was not able to join us today. But we should expect to see Judge Peterson and perhaps Judge Wagner as well.
All right, thank you. You should have in your packet the minutes from our October 6th meeting, and I would look for a motion to approve those minutes.
So move.
David, second?
Kevin will second.
Okay, second by Kevin. Any discussion, corrections, or changes? Otherwise, all those in favor of approving those minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Those minutes are approved. Public comment. Krista, do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
All right. So then we move into our consideration of actions to be taken by the committee. And our first, and probably will take up a majority of the rest of the meeting, is a discussion about or looking to come out with recommendations of how to move forward based on the meth information, frequent meth user information, which has been being compiled over the last few months. So I will turn it over to you, Sarah, to review that information.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. So in the packet, there was a written report regarding the recommendations from the exercise, really looking at the frequent meth user. As Chris mentioned, over the last several months, the data work group really compiled that information to put it together. We've got a phone number here. I'm not sure who that is, but okay. So we'll see who that is in a minute here. We do have Judge Peterson joining us, so maybe it's Judge Wagner. The last couple of meetings of the operations group, we were really hoping to have a robust discussion and have some organic recommendations come through our leadership group. It's been difficult to get everybody together to have the conversation. So therefore, this is why it's coming back kind of in the written recommendation form. But I know some of you were able to participate in some of those conversations and some of you were not. So I tried to provide the detail in the written report, really looking at some of the findings. So does anybody have any questions of the findings? Or Chris, do you want me to go through them again, or?
I think a summary of them would be appropriate. Okay.
So in general, we looked at 3 years of data from our clerk of courts, our law enforcement, and assessment and human service data, and really tried to look at those that had more than one methamphetamine related charge. It could be a charge for possession or a charge for distribution or manufacturing. Over a 3-year period from 2018, 2019, 2020, 315 individuals were in contact with our criminal justice system on related meth charges. And those were just the ones with meth charges, not the ones that maybe have meth related charges like burglary or other things. So these were just on the face value meth charges. Of that 315, 82 had more than one arrest, more than one contact. So that really was that frequent meth user group that we dove into to look at more of the data trends coming from that. Kind of ratio, 72% were men, 28% were women. That's pretty consistent with what we see across the board with just our criminal justice population to begin with. When we looked at that population of 82 to try to dig in, were they assessed for drug issues? And then we found that 60% of that 82 were assessed for treatment needs, and 45% of those disclosed a severe methamphetamine problem. So they're pretty much out front attesting that they do have a severe methamphetamine problem. Very few actually, downgraded that, saying that they had mild or no problem or a moderate problem. And then a sizable chunk of that either were not, 40% were either not assessed or declined the assessment. When we're looking at that group of 82, about 38% were referred to the treatment opportunity program, and about another 38% were referred to a treatment court program. So we're kind of under referring that group of people that have identified, significant needs. But really kind of diving into some of the common trends that we found, that these folks have multiple charges. I'm speaking to the choir. I think we all kind of recognize some of these, but it's really kind of in black and white. But multiple charges in the surrounding areas, multiple open cases in surrounding counties. Failure to appear is a significant factor with this population. And it did seem whether there was cash or signature bond, it didn't really matter. The failure to appear was there. Signature bonds were repeatedly given to this group after failures to appear. And then we started to see some nominal cash amounts that came up after repeated failures to appear. So kind of alluding to really giving opportunities for people to show up and deal with their court cases, but aren't necessarily doing so. Those that were sentenced to probation, some of them multiple times, and they were ordered to complete their a substance use assessment and follow recommendations. So that was a common theme that we did see if they were just sentenced to probation. For those that were sentenced to prison, the outcomes were poor. Those cycled through our system more. And it seemed like the sentences were shorter due to the earned release program. So for whatever the sentence was, the actual time that they spent in the prison institution was a much lesser amount because of the earned release program. What we saw with this group by and large are unpaid fines, unpaid restitution. A lot of them are in collections and really not able to pay any of those. Multiple addresses are used. There was a trend that, each time somebody was in court, they would give a different address. Part of this is related to homelessness and just that couch surfing that we see with people. But what happens because of the multiple addresses is there's delays in court with mail being undeliverable. There's failures to appear. They don't know when they didn't get to receive their mail, so they don't know when they have a court date. We have warrant pickups. There's court rescheduling. So a lot of system resources really go out to a few people that are either purposely or unintentionally moving around a lot, and it's hard to keep up with them. We're also seeing a long time for court cases to be resolved, over a year plus for most of these. And then we also see new charges while on pretrial release. So, about a third of this population came back on additional meth charges. So I think we're all seeing that as well. COVID, no doubt, has increased the delays on the court processing. And then I think just the letting the court system play out with the defense attorney, prosecution, doing their roles can delay the court case as well. When we looked at the connection with human services, there was less of a connection with the behavioral health outpatient. There was a small connection with human services crisis services, but there was a huge connection with child welfare. And again, there's no surprise here when the parent is in active addiction, they're not able to care for their child, and that can lead to adverse outcomes for those children. The majority of people, the frequent meth users, had thefts or other property crimes was pretty common. They also had driving offenses. So whether had operating after suspension, operating after revocation, or OWI, it seemed to be common. Failures to appear, after we all are already mentioned. Also a history of evictions, history of failure to pay and small claims court cases, history of garnishments and judgments in their records, unpaid bills, unpaid fines, and then that housing instability. Again, those that went to prison, if they did the earned release program, they were out in about a year, and they did cycle back through our system more. If they came back to our community, we often would get them back they would have new charges and get back into the system here. And then less than 40% were referred to our existing CJCC treatment programs. So whether that's the TOP program, treatment court, family treatment court. And kind of noting that treatment court, when they are in our community and engaged in these programs, there's a lot of intensive supervision that's going on. There's a lot of monitoring that's going on. And that doesn't necessarily happen as with other alternatives. So in looking, maybe I'll pause there to see if there's any questions about kind of the findings before we move into potential strategies. Yes, Jim.
Thank you. I looked through this morning, and the suggested remedies are all really labor intensive. But the problem is really labor intensive as well. Have we done any kind of a comparison that would demonstrate that for the amount of time put in, we get a better result if we just abandon these people, or if we put in the amount of time that it's going to be necessary to affect some positive outcome?
Well, I don't know that necessarily. I think what we're doing right now is labor intensive. So
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think some of these strategies are actually low cost, no cost, or just alternative approaches. So, we did not look at the dollars and cents of these things versus incarceration or some of the alternatives, but the idea that these people just go away, that's just not the case, right? They're there, whether they go to prison, whether they go to treatment court, or whether they just do jail time and get out. They're still in our community. And, there's a lot of costs that happen, not just to our criminal justice system, but also the behavioral health system. When the folks aren't getting their treatment needs addressed, those things continue. So, I guess to answer your question directly, no, there hasn't been a comparison. We haven't reached that yet.
You made my point, though, really, because as I look through the section on what the majority of the individuals exhibit as far as behavior now, thefts, property crime, driving offenses, failure to appear, all of those things require people somewhere, either in the police department, the sheriff's office, health and human services, housing, they all require attention. And it strikes me, and again, I'm speaking as a person who gets feedback on what the county spends its money on. If we can easily demonstrate that our money is more productively used in treating people rather than in reacting to their misfortune and the behavior that results from that, it's a much easier sell in terms of providing budget funding. But yes, you made my point. Thank you.
Other questions before we move on? Okay. So this is really kind of my perspective. I think everyone here has their own perspectives, and we're really wanting to have a conversation and a dialogue about potential recommendations and things that we want to move forward on. So this list isn't by any means exhaustive or really fully encompassing everybody's perspectives. It's really kind of based on the data and based on some evidence-based practices. But, you know, the problem areas that clearly come out here are pretrial misconduct, getting the new charges, substance abuse charges or other charges while people are awaiting for their case to be resolved. There's continuing use despite consequences. So that really is a defining factor of addiction, that is not stopping because of the facing consequences. And then also the failures to appear. So that's been a consistent problem for years. We see the sickest, the illest, the most severely addicted people really cycling more through the system. And really the prison provides containment, but it doesn't necessarily provide the best treatment. They are increasing the treatment that's being provided in institutions, but it is not as effective as community-based treatment. And then, just the treatment needs, whether it's in the community here, in our jail, there are people that are not getting their treatment needs met for a variety of reasons. So those are some of the kind of broad brush problems that come out of this. So some potential strategies. One is managing expectations. And I think this speaks to Supervisor Tripp's question and really helping, show that demonstrate through dollars and cents and outcomes that treatment has better outcomes overall than incarceration. And this is by no means saying that things have to be one or the other. It's usually a combination of both. It's usually a combination of incarceration with treatment. But really that treatment component, the idea that somebody can just be punished and will not do it again, doesn't hold when we're talking about addiction. So I think it's managing expectations. Also, the recovery rate of this population isn't that high, meaning part of what we need to recognize is the outcomes are poor any which way, but they're better through treatment, and it's better through community-based treatment. But on average, we're hearing 7 to 9 times that somebody has to go through a treatment program to have sustained recovery, not just one time. So that's part of it, managing expectations. I think another potential strategy, which we already have in place, but doing it more universally, is assessment for treatment needs and program eligibility. So we've got Sandy, our criminal justice assessor, going into meeting with those that are booked and held in jail and doing that, the drug screen and the mental health screen and making a referral, just marking if they're potentially eligible for the treatment court or TOP program. But that's only for those that are booked and held in jail. So I think there's opportunity to really reach out to more people that have drug-related charges or methamphetamine-related charges for screening of treatment needs and also eligibility and referral to programs. I think there's also a need to work across counties with our treatment court programs, because residency is a requirement we have, Chippewa has, Eau Claire has, and what happens, like somebody that lives in Elk Mound or moves around between the Chippewa Valley, they're not eligible here, they're not eligible there, they're not eligible anywhere. So they get excluded from some of these programs. So there could be some collaboration we can do with our sister programs out there in surrounding counties. Third is provide pretrial services and bond monitoring. So the recommendation is to develop a release condition matrix with stakeholder consensus. So this is really some groundwork, work group type stuff to develop a kind of a consistent approach to make recommendations as far as release conditions. These would just be recommendations that are put forth to the judges to consider. But if it is done by consensus, so this is part of our new, we're moving to the public safety assessment in January. We have a system, the AIMS system, that supports that because we have to do electronic calculations of it. So part of this is to develop a conditions release matrix. It can be simple or it can be complicated, but it can really get, if we have full stakeholder involvement, we can kind of reach some of those consensus as far as the risk that we're willing to take when it comes to release versus going with that gut based test. There's also ability to enhance the court reminder system. So currently, Katie's office with the clerk of courts does have a court reminder system with our CCAP system. This AIMS pretrial also has the ability for us to do text reminders, calls, and we can even extend it to the point of office visits. And then it's bond monitoring. And I think that is ongoing informally, but it can be done more consistently, really taking a look at who's out there and some of the criminal activity that goes on. And then also at the pretrial stage, it's connecting with social services and treatment options. It's not mandating them, it's really connecting, reducing barriers. Because a lot of these folks have a host of barriers that prevent them from, having their life in an order of that they can follow through and show up when they're supposed to for court dates. Another potential strategy, and this is something we've kicked around in the past, when we had Chief lead our EBDM work group, it's the rocket docket idea to really take that, resolve those meth cases sooner. And that can be done by incentivizing treatment and really our system being open to the fact that it does take multiple attempts for people to get sustained recovery and being more open to repeat customers, so to speak. Another potential strategy is to close the service gap. So if we assess that there's treatment needs, that we try to deliver those treatment needs. And then really trying to ensure that people are getting assessed and then referred to treatment programs. Ensuring that we have social services to address the needs and the criminogenic needs, right? So those factors that are related to recidivism. So these are things we've been working on and continue to work on, but housing, transportation, employment, education, evidence-based treatment in the community and jail, and then really ensuring that substance use disorders, mental health, medical assistant treatment, domestic violence, parenting, all those needs are addressed if we really want to have the outcomes we're looking for.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
Please.
So I just have a question. I thought we were going through the data, going to have a robust discussion among the members and then determine how we want to move forward. And I just don't know where you're getting your list. Is this something you've developed or was this at a previous meeting or?
Yeah, no, this is something that's based on the data and then based on evidence-based research and practices out there. So, right. So this is just kind of prepping us for a robust discussion here. So,
okay.
So these are just potential strategies. The sixth one, I think this is the last one, is leveraging existing programs. So again, there's the under referral, under enrollment in the programs. And it's really emphasizing that, we need to encourage people to partake in treatment and create carrots, that carrot versus stick argument. So getting back to, and right, so this, as you mentioned, Andrea, so this is, we're kind of working backwards because we haven't had the time in the group together to really move in a forward way. So I guess my recommendation would be for the group to perhaps develop a team to look at pretrial activities. And then really kind of focus on reducing failures to appear, reducing that pretrial misconduct, developing supervision, condition release matrix, examining what is effective in the pretrial monitoring, and then really looking at developing a bond review process. For our September dashboard, 39% of the folks that were in jail are pretrial. So those are folks that are charged with a crime but not convicted. That's the highest probably we've seen yet. So we definitely have a large population that's meeting that. And then also it's kind of increasing the numbers that are assessed, considered, and referred to top family treatment court and treatment court, and increase the evidence-based treatment options in jail and in the community. So I'm going to pause there because that was a lot of information. And then I'll turn it over to Chris to facilitate our conversation.
So I think you're spot on, Andrea. The issue was really just, I would call them conversation starters, or an attempt to try to begin to focus the conversation into potential areas of intervention. That being said, I think it is wide open to, based on the data, people's input about what, where they think might be a good spot for us to start. And I would suggest that we start with 1 or 2 areas of focus so that we can experience some success and maybe some quick wins to move them forward. But so based on what you all now have just seen and heard, do people have thoughts about where would be a good spot for us to start as a system?
I'll throw in my 2 cents that the people we deal with, these 82 people, I'll just say multiple meth charges. The only time they're not doing meth is when they're in jail. And the only time they're not victimizing the good citizens of Dunn County is when they're sitting in jail. I'm all for second, third, maybe even fourth chances, but these repeat customers, we've got a guy in Huber right now that it's about his 15th time through the system, and some people just need to be held accountable and protect the community.
How does that happen, though? I mean, I'm not arguing that should or shouldn't be. I'm just saying, if some of this is, even when people are sent to prison, they're on early release and go through early release program, are out in a year and back.
Right. Most people need 3-4 years to get it out of their system before they have the drive. People that have been into prison for 3 or 4 years will tell you it was 3 years, 4 years before I lost the drive to get out and continue using meth. And we have an obligation to protect the community too. And this revolving door of people victimizing, innocent people in the county, whether they're using drugs or not. Like I say, I'm all for second, third, maybe even fourth chances, but eventually some of these people with the revolving door are going to have to be held accountable.
I just have to say, and I do agree with you, Kevin. I'm just wondering what's happening in between the gaps of the use and the returning to jail. Like, what's happening? Are they able to find stable housing? Because that seems to be like a really huge issue. And because they more than likely already have mental health issues, they become either more depressed or do become depressed or full of anxiety and start to cope with the substance. And I'm just wondering what happens in between the gaps, especially the ones that are, multiple reoffenders.
Yeah, most of them are couch hopping, like was mentioned earlier, and they're just going from one of their buddy's house to another until they wear out their welcome, and then they get kicked out and move on to somebody else. But we've got transitional housing right now that the majority of the people in the transitional housing are using drugs, and so that's not the answer either.
Chief has his hand up.
I missed that, Shelley. What was that?
So Chief has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Chief, you have a hand up.
I do. I don't know how to take it down, but I do have my hand up. I was going to offer up. I think that certainly doing some pretrial program is needed for monitoring of some kind, because I think it really, for this population that we're talking about, the ones that keep coming back, the monitoring piece up front when they're entering in the system is going to be critical for them to try to keep from reoffending. And that involves like case management, trying to get them resources. I'm not sure under our constitution, what kind of restrictions can be done, just because they're innocent until proven guilty, of course. And then the other part with these folks, when they're not in the system, let's say they're released from prison or they're just not facing charges at the moment, is trying to reach out to them on more of a preventative measure. So I would say the treatment is the key piece, but then it's the interventions that come in, whether they're in the system or out of the system, and that case management to make sure, yes, they got the housing, but if they're in the transitional housing, that they got the case management and the supervision, because frankly, when they're in that battling that addiction, their ability to think like a rational adult is extremely limited. It takes time because we understand the neuroscience of it, at least 18 months sobriety for chemicals to return to normal or closer to normal in the brain. So a lot of that is just being able to provide not just the treatment opportunities, which I think we do pretty well here, but then having that case management piece, both when they're awaiting trial to try to keep them out of trouble from collecting further charges, and then when they're not in the system, to get them those opportunities, and then to make sure they're overcoming those barriers that they might have, getting to the counseling, getting to their cognitive behavioral therapy, resolving their licenses and such, because they still got a lot of issues and they need that supervision. And we can provide the opportunities. If we don't have the supervision or don't have enough capacity for it, then I think those folks will start to fail or fail more frequently. So that's at least my two thoughts. And to kind of get to what Mr. Tripp was bringing up earlier, there's a considerable number of studies out there that show that if we do offer treatment opportunities and overcome those things, you can lower rates of recidivism. So I would argue it is well worth the time and the energy to put into folks. And some will continue to have problems and may not come around. But we know that folks that whether they're forced through court or go on their own, they're about 50-50 likely to complete treatment and succeed. So I think people are worth taking that chance on. Well, you just got to have that supervision piece in order to help them get through, because they're learning how to become adults again. And if they ever had that opportunity, really. So those are just my thoughts on it.
I'll comment on that. Being a person in recovery and having gone through the system, as y'all know, I do appreciate the jail time, but I can say I also appreciated the probation. But like you said, Chief, I can tell you that I don't know how, for me personally, how well my recovery would have continued without some other type of support. Because like you said, Chief, there has to be somebody that's willing to take the time to help hold you accountable, because probation is associated with DOC. It's usually kind of shied at a little bit. I mean, I utilized mine. I utilized my probation officer, but I can say that, it has to be a really huge combination of support, because we don't, and our brain says, no, I don't want to. So I totally agree with you, Chief. But I can say, I'm one of few, probably, since it's been 19 years since I think it's 19 years for graduation from Arbor Place. So yeah. Anyway, that's my other 2 cents.
And I think to add on to what the chief said is accountability with that supervision, and Shelley touched on it, is making sure we're holding the people accountable that are continuing to use and are getting caught using. And because if they're not being held accountable, it's like the kid that steals from the candy jar every time. They're just going to continue to do it unless there's, some recourse.
Yes, I just want to add in, I think Dunn County does an amazing job of offering treatment to people. Not everyone takes advantage of it, but I think we have a number of programs. And in my opinion, usually a person doesn't see a prison sentence for a meth or a delivery charge until they've been on probation 3-4 times or more. And they've been unsuccessful. It takes a lot to get to prison on a drug case unless you're dealing a pound of meth. I personally would like to see if we can revise some of the programs that we already have existing to see if there's something we can be more effective with. I personally would like to see how much our treatment court is costing us compared to the outcomes in comparison to a prison sentence. I'm not saying that everyone should go to prison, and I think we have a very good treatment court program, but I also have problems with individuals who are using methamphetamine while they have the most intense supervision we offer, and yet don't go to jail and continue to just, stay at home using, which is a concern for public safety, in my opinion. And, my office sees victims who are the result of that. And so I think that we can make some revisions, or at least examine making some revisions to our programs to make them more effective.
Judge Meyer, Judge Peterson, thoughts?
Well, I don't have anything, today. Frankly, I think that, that it's very frustrating and to deal with this meth population. For straight possession charges, your maximum penalty for meth is basically 18 months. This is long as they could be sent to prison. If we're talking about putting more people in jail, then you have to look at, what kind of capacity are we going to have for that? And are we going to have better outcomes if we put people in jail up front on possession charges for a significant period of time? I guess I'd like to see what the data says, about that. As it relates to getting people to appear in court, I think the most effective programs are those programs where they're actually calling people, having pretrial services where you're reminding people of their court dates and staying on them and that sort of thing. We looked into a pretrial monitoring program, and I think for a number of reasons, we decided against going forward with that. That was a few years ago. We did a field trip we went both to the Eau Claire's, which is, I think, outsourced to LSS, and they have a day report center, and then St. Croix's model where they put it in addition on the jail, and they handle the fingerprinting and photographing as well as drug testing. And I think they stopped operating for the most part during the pandemic. But the problem with that is, as the chief pointed out, is that you are essentially putting more people, you're putting people on more onerous conditions of supervision than they have if they're actually on probation. So, and here's the problem. One thing we see in treatment court is that we see a lot of the violations because of the close supervision. But, I'd be willing to bet you if you actually look at the people that are on probation, just straight probation, they don't get tested very often. They really don't get that close of scrutiny. And, I think you would see that people can pretty much use drugs while on probation with impunity unless they get caught. And that's the reality, that there's a big expense. And I'm not sure what you mean by holding people accountable. That is, I don't know quite what that means. Does that mean making them pay for, the choices they make, punishing them? Or does that mean, that we're testing them more often, and then there's some sanctions if they're caught? So, if we, the program in St. Croix County actually does more drug testing for people that are on bond than the Department of Corrections does if they're placed on probation. So, maybe if there was a way where the Department of Corrections could enhance the testing while people are on supervision, that may be a good place to start. Start with the people that have already been found guilty and see whether you have better outcomes, by more jail time or more frequent testing, and then timely sanctions if they are violating the conditions of their probation. But I mean, it's the thing is there really isn't anything out there that tells us the data, how much jail. I mean, Sergeant, Sheriff, if we put people, black people in simple possession up for 3 years, I mean, that just isn't going to happen. It just isn't going to happen. The resources aren't there. It just isn't going to happen. There's not even that amount of penalty. We give people a prison sentence on a long prison sentence, and if they get earned release program, they're out relatively short period of time. Now we can say in a sense that they, can't be eligible for ERP until they've served a certain amount of time of their sentence. But a lot of times those prison sentences are people with a very substantial quantity of meth, as well as perhaps repeater things. But, I don't know. I don't want to tell you that I have the answers today. I think, maybe we need to continue this discussion, maybe try some things, as you mentioned, Chris, because, trying to get some success. But number one, I truly believe if you're going to try to improve the appearance rate, you need to have somebody actively trying to contact these people on a regular basis. It's unbelievable how many people have a change of address from the time they're arrested to their initial appearance date in court, which is usually, 4 to 6 weeks. And then from court date to court date. So, that's it's a real big challenge, and there's just no question about it. Are there any models out there that we could look at in any jurisdictions that are being, more successful with dealing with methamphetamine problems? That's something maybe we could look at as well. But there's just no easy answer, and I think this discussion has to be ongoing, and we have to come up with some, some hypotheses, and then try and see whether we can do that. But until people on probation have the same sort of supervision that people on bail in some places with the pretrial program have, that's a big problem. We have, again, people on probation that essentially just get away with continue to use. So anyway, that's just a stream of consciousness from what I've heard so far. And then the question is, if we start doing, jail sentences for simple possession, how's that going to affect the jail and the cost of running the jail, and whether are we going to have room? And then, there's the concern is some jail time you're putting people in with other high risk offenders, and maybe you're making the problem worse in some situations. So I just don't think locking them up is the answer. It's just a lot more complicated than that. So that's my thought. Thank you. I suppose I had my mic off the whole.
You've been talking for 10 minutes, Jim. We couldn't hear a word. Judge Meyer, did
Chief's
you have
got his
thoughts?
hand up.
Oh, Chief's got his hand up again. Let's give Judge Meyer an opportunity. I saw her unmute herself here previously, so.
Just shortly, I'm concerned about the people that are in jail on bonds that have not been convicted. And at some point, lots of those people are re-offending over and over and over again. And at some point, it has to be a protection of our community. If they're just committing more and more crimes, we have to protect our community. One of the problems I've run into is that if they are in jail on a bond, getting them treatment while they're in jail is incredibly difficult. It's hard to figure out how to get them to the treatment facility without releasing them on a signature bond and saying, off you go, we're going to let you decide by yourself. If they're going to go to treatment, and it's much easier after they've been convicted to get them to the treatment facility than it is while they're on bond. And I've tried to do some creative stuff to let people go to treatment during that period of time if they want to. And so I think that if they want to go to treatment and they can figure that out, we should be trying to help them figure that out. That's part of the problem I've been running into. But again, I'm not just willing to release them on their own recognizance, because some of those people are simply committing more and more crimes, or allegedly committing more and more crimes. And at some point, we just have to protect our community.
Chief? You're muted.
Sorry about that. You'd think after 2 years of a pandemic, I'd figure out how to mute and unmute myself. So to just follow up on the two judges, and it's hard to disagree with what they're saying just because of those challenges when it comes to people that are on bond, and the restrictions that we're talking about doing would be more extensive than DOC. And so just kind of thinking on that, I don't think we're going to be able to move the DOC one way or another, just because that's such a large organization. We'd have to focus in more on what's best for Dunn County and our communities. If we're talking about trying to help folks to not reoffend and get the treatment, instead of having like a traditional sort of pretrial services, it may be worth exploring just how as entities we can work together, that if we do have a person that, let's say, we've identified as a high risk person for their meth or addiction, where we can follow them for wraparound services. So they get done, let's say they're bond out, if it's a signature bond, whatever it may be, then immediately then someone from the group would approach the person. Hey, we would like to get you some treatment and some help. We want you to be successful while you're out on bond, and continuing to follow up with this. I mean, not that they're necessarily all of them are going to want to do it. Maybe none of them will want to do it, but maybe some will. And then trying to provide them the resources like what we do for folks that are in treatment or that are looking at coming out of incarceration, where we try to help them overcome those barriers to be successful. It doesn't mean they're admitting guilt to their case, and maybe this is something we need to get the defense bar to kind of help us with too, or partner with. But perhaps that's the option. It's kind of like maybe similar to what we're looking at doing for interventions for people who we know have suffered non-fatal opioid overdoses and other methamphetamine addictions. So just a thought out there, because I do recognize the legal challenges the judges are talking about, the very fair statements.
So I'd like to circle back for a second, because so I as in a group this size, we're going to have a pretty broad continuum of perspectives on this issue and what the potential solutions are, or things to try are. But I wanted to go back to that sort of to see if there's any way to ferret out a little bit better, sort of that idea about is increased effort the direction to go or not. So I have this sort of like this mental picture of 10 people, 10 frequent users of the criminal justice system who are methamphetamine addicted. And 5 years from now, one of them or two of them, but I'll just say one of them is going to die or move away, because that's how that works with a high risk population. And maybe 7 of them cycle through the system over and over and over again, or I don't pick a number, but 7 of them. But 2 of them cycle through a few times and are successful in moving towards recovery, sobriety and recovery. Like, is that worthwhile? Is that a worthwhile investment on the part of our system for those essentially 2 people? And I'm just picking numbers. Maybe it's 1, maybe it's 4. I don't know. We know from our treatment court data and our top program data, we have recidivism data about how often those people are coming back into the system when they actually receive treatment. But, you know, like, I think it's a legitimate question. It sort of started with Supervisor Tripp's question, and, you know, Kevin alludes to it, you know, Andrea a bit. I mean, what do we think about that?
Well, Chris, I think that the 2 or 3 people that we can save, we all want to help them. I mean, I'd like to help them all, but the reality is we're not going to save everybody. You know, and I'm all in on those 2 or 3 people that are going to give us a chance to help them. You know, the others, I don't know what you do with them, but you know, like Judge Meyer mentioned, they're going to continue to victimize, and we need to protect the community from them.
I think my thinking would be, if you start with 10 and you do nothing except what traditionally might be done, which isn't even what we're doing, because we have additional things to do outside of what traditionally might be done. But you start with 10 and you do nothing different, you'll get 10 people 5 years from now, or maybe 9 because one dies. 9 people who don't look substantially probably any different than when they started. And I'm not trying to make an argument in one way or another. I think this is a great conversation for this group to have, because it really is about, we started out saying, what's the one issue that we as a group, or what is a one issue that we as a group can identify as impacting the system across many disciplines? And we all said methamphetamine. So here we are with methamphetamine data now, at least around who those folks are that are frequently touching the system. And now the question becomes, all right, so now we know a little bit more about what this looks like. Do we have any consensus about how we move forward to address that? Or is it an unaddressable issue?
But Judge Mayer, you have something? I see you're unmuted, but go ahead.
It's not unaddressable. Hospitals address these issues all the time. How much are we going to spend to save a person's life? Hospitals, insurance companies address these issues all the time. It's an incredibly difficult conversation, but it's not an impossible conversation to have.
I mentioned transitional housing, and we've got we've had somebody talk to us, somebody in my agency, and say, I'd like to go to transitional housing, but everybody there is using, and that doesn't help me kick, my meth habit if everybody in transitional housing is using. So those are the things we need to start with, and make sure we have a good, clean place for these people to go and help the people that want help. If they're in transitional housing using yet, they need to be booted out and give that opportunity to somebody that isn't using. There's a start. Hold those people accountable and, make them move on. Eric, I see your lips moving, but you're
again, here we are, 2 years, pandemic, can't figure it out. So I think part of the strain with the transitional housing is just the capacity to provide the case management. We know that people who are addicted are going to have relapses. That's going to happen. But part of it is just making sure that we have enough people there to manage what they're doing, making sure they're going to their therapy, going to their treatment, overcoming or helping them with their criminogenic needs that have been identified. And I think if you don't have enough of that, I think you start to get some of those issues where they start going back into old habits and using again. And because they're users. They got substance use disorders. They probably got dual diagnosis with mental health issues too as well. So they got a lot of things that need to be done. I wouldn't want to throw that away. I just would want to make sure that, and maybe this is part of the answer that we're looking for, is that we just have the right amount of supervision for those folks to help them get what they need to become successful. I firmly believe we're going to get people that'll fail and reuse and have a relapse because they do. And then we got to get them back into the system. I think Sarah might even have mentioned it. What is it, 8, 9 times you get failures? So it's part of it. So if they use again, I wouldn't want to see them just kicked out right off the bat. But I'd like to see them to have that supervision so that way they can get that treatment and then work to become successful and then transition out so they can get housing of their own, jobs, those sorts of things.
So I've been sitting back and listening, and I don't know that I have anything particularly insightful to add to this conversation, except that I expect Sarah could point to programs around the country that have been successful in reducing recidivism, reducing the burden on the court system and the jail system in their area. But I also suspect we'll find that it boils down to money. That these are programs that are better funded, that have more financial resources to run the house, the congregate, the we used to call them halfway houses, with the treatment facilities and the case managers, to do the assessments up front when a person is first arrested, to assess for addiction problems or mental health problems and divert with the agreement of the court out of the justice system and into treatment programs. I suspect it all boils down to money. And I suspect we find that we don't have the kind of money of these successful programs, which begs the question, what can we do with the resources we have? What can we do differently if what we've been doing so far has not been as effective enough to justify our efforts to date? Now, that's just my naive assessment, and I'd be happy to be disabused of those notions. But that's kind of what I'm thinking as I'm sitting here listening to everybody else. Appreciate any response on that.
David?
I had some thoughts, kind of the same path as what Paul just mentioned. Speaking of budgets and financing, but Chris brought up when we started this meeting, she said we should pick something that we could try and hopefully see some successes with. And the one thing I've heard at most meetings we go to is the failure to appear in court. And I've heard that from different departments, the problem and the expense and the stress and whatever. So I don't know. I think we should think about what Chris mentioned, and all this stuff that we've been talking about, to me, sounds like something really big to take on, like trying to get more staff at Transition House or I don't know. It just seems like maybe we should look, like Chris said, start at something that we can try to see a success in, and then move on from there. Take one thing at a time. And it just seems like maybe that's something we could look into to see if we can solve that problem anyway, because that seems to affect every department.
And honestly, kind of building on that, and I know we're almost out of time, building on that, it's also a fairly easy thing to measure if what we're doing is successful or not. So we're going to have a population of people who, I mean, or you can set it up that way to have a population of people who receive a different kind of a, I'll just say intervention with regard to, or process with regard to notifications or failure to appear versus people who don't. And you can see whether there's a difference or not. It's somewhat easy to set up to see whether or not what we do makes a difference. Well, I appreciate the time in deference to the fact that we all have other obligations. I think that's as far as we can go with our conversation, but I would like to come back to, I think we've had conversations in the data work group previously. We've talked a lot about failure to appears. I know Katie's got some strong thoughts about that. And just, you're right, Dave, that those absorb an intense amount of time, energy, and effort. And maybe we could come back next month and just pick up from there and say, is that an area, meth, no meth? It doesn't in some regards, but I mean, even if we just focus on the folks that are frequent users related to drugs and see whether or not there's something we could trial differently with regard to appearances. Some of that would decrease the amount of time that folks have to be hopping around counties from county to county if we can get them through our own processes more quickly. So with, I guess, with your approval, I'd suggest that's where we start next time. All right. Thank you all for being good.
And one note, I'm going to
Oh.
put out a doodle on our next meeting dates because we've got scheduling conflicts. So be on the lookout for a doodle for ops and executive.
And
Good.
Sarah, do we have one other action item? Sorry, I get to the top of the agenda. Here we go. Recommendation on CEF SF grant digital evidence system.
So, and Andrea can certainly speak more about this, but we were given an option by the Department of Justice to extend our grant as far as June 30th, 2022, if we weren't able to reach consensus and make purchase of that digital evidence system.
So what you would be looking for is a motion to extend that grant
Well, I think,
or not?
I don't know if we have enough time, the conversation. I think we got an update from Andrea, or maybe she wants to chime in. Are we close to a decision, or should we request an extension, or what's the census?
Yeah, I think we need to ask for an extension. I don't think we've found anything that works with our current electronic limitations between agencies. So an extension would be appreciated.
I would make a motion that we ask for an extension on that grant.
I'll
Second.
second that.
All right. Any other discussion about that? Otherwise, all those that are in favor of that extension signify by saying aye.
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 All right. Looks like the motion carries. Anything else that we have to tackle today? Otherwise, we will get some information out regarding the next meeting soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.